I never thought I would live to see the day when the child I raised with all my heart would allow the woman he married to treat me as if I were nothing. I gave life to my son, Daniel. I sacrificed sleep, comfort, and even my own dreams to make sure he would grow up strong, educated, and full of opportunities. Yet in my later years, when most mothers hope to be cherished, respected, and cared for, I found myself mocked, insulted, and dismissed in my own son's home. Yes, it cut deeply. Every harsh word from my daughter-in-law, Claire, landed like a heavy stone on my chest. Her mocking laughter, her careless insults, and the way she rolled her eyes at me, it was as though she delighted in making me feel small. And what hurt the most wasn't even her cruelty. It was Daniel's silence. My boy, the one I raised with trembling hands and endless prayers, would sit quietly as his wife's words pierced me. But let me tell you something. Life has a strange way of turning tables, and when it does, it doesn't ask for permission. Everything began to change, slowly at first, and then all at once, in ways Claire never saw coming. Before I take you into the heart of my story, let me pause for a moment. If you've ever been disrespected despite giving your all, whether by family, friends, or even your own children, then you'll understand the ache I carried. I'd like you to take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to the channel, not just to support me, but to make sure stories like mine, stories that speak to the hidden struggles of so many, continue to reach others who might need them. And if you've ever felt overlooked despite your sacrifices, I want you to share your thoughts in the comments. I promise, you're not alone. Now, let me tell you how it all began. My name is Margaret. I'm 62 years old and a widow. My husband passed away when Daniel was still a teenager. The years that followed were not easy, but I had no time to crumble. I worked 2 jobs, one in a bakery early in the morning and another cleaning offices late into the night. People often told me I was wearing myself out, that no single woman could carry so much on her shoulders. But they didn't understand. Daniel was my reason. If it meant going hungry so he could eat, I did it. If it meant walking to work in the pouring rain so I could save bus fare for his school books, I didn't hesitate. And Daniel did not disappoint me. He was ambitious, sharp, and determined. I still remember the glow in his eyes the day he got accepted into college. I cried tears of joy, not only because he made it, but because I felt every sacrifice had finally been worth it. He went on to graduate, secure a good job, and begin building the kind of future I had always dreamed of for him. That future, however, came with Claire. Claire swept into Daniel's life like a whirlwind. She was young, stylish, and full of charm. To Daniel, she seemed perfect, confident, outspoken, and modern. But from the very beginning, I felt the cracks. The way she sized me up when we first met, her forced smile, and her dismissive tone, it was subtle, but as a mother, I knew. My son saw only beauty and confidence. I saw pride and arrogance. Still, I bit my tongue because I wanted him to be happy. Little did I know, that was only the beginning of a long, painful road. After the wedding, I tried to convince myself that things would settle. Daniel had started working long hours at a financial firm, and he seemed eager to give Claire the life she dreamed of. I reminded myself that all marriages came with adjustments, and perhaps Claire simply needed time to warm up to me. But soon the truth became undeniable. Claire carried herself with the kind of confidence that might have been admirable in someone else, but in her, it often crossed into arrogance. She was quick-witted, but her words cut like sharp blades. She had an eye for luxury, from her designer handbags to the latest shoes she proudly displayed. I noticed early on that she seemed embarrassed by anything simple or modest. When I offered to cook a meal for them one evening, a dish Daniel had loved since childhood, Claire smirked the moment she tasted it. "Interesting," she said, swirling her fork in the food as if it were beneath her. "I suppose people used to eat this kind of thing so years ago." Daniel gave a small, nervous laugh and quickly changed the subject, but I felt the sting. It wasn't just a comment about the food, it was a dismissal of me, of my history, of everything I had given. And it didn't stop there. Whenever I suggested something about keeping the house tidy or caring for the grandchild when he came along, Claire brushed me off. "Thanks, Margaret," she would say, voice dripping with false sweetness. "But we're not living in the past anymore. We do things differently now." It might sound small, but those words piled up. Each time, they chipped away at me. And through it all, Daniel stayed silent. He was busy, overworked, and always tired when he came home. I knew he didn't want conflict between his wife and his mother, so he let the little cuts go unchecked. What he didn't realize was that silence can wound as much as words. I tried to find comfort in reminding myself of the bigger picture. Daniel had stability, a career, a family of his own. That was what I had wanted for him all along. But in quiet moments, I would sit in my small room at the back of their house and wonder, where do I belong now? I had once been everything to him, the one who stayed up when he had fevers, the one who clapped the loudest at his school plays, the one who carried the weight of both parents when his father died. But now, I felt like an afterthought. I should have spoken up. I should have told Claire that respect for elders is not outdated, that kindness costs nothing, and that my presence in their home wasn't a burden but a blessing. But each time I opened my mouth, I swallowed the words. For Daniel's sake. For peace. For the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, Claire would see me differently if I remained patient. But patience is not always rewarded. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Claire made a remark that pierced more deeply than any before. I had offered to serve the meal, as I often did, and she laughed lightly, turning to Daniel. "Your mum insists on helping, doesn't she? Honestly, sometimes it feels like she's trying to prove she's still useful." The table fell silent. Daniel lowered his gaze, avoiding mine. Claire smiled, satisfied with the blow she had landed. I felt heat rise in my face, but I said nothing. My fork shook in my hand as I forced myself to keep eating. That was the night I realized that my silence was no longer protecting Daniel. It was simply giving Claire more space to crush me. The days that followed that dinner seemed to set a new rhythm. Claire had found her voice, and she didn't hesitate to use it. Every small thing I did became a subject of her disapproval. If I folded laundry, she would refold it in front of me, saying, "That's not how we do it here." If I offered advice about the baby's feeding, she would smile tightly and reply, "I read that's outdated, but thank you." If I dressed in my modest clothes for church, she would glance at me from head to toe and mutter, "Some people really don't try, do they?" The words were delivered with sweetness, but they cut sharper than open insults. I truly tried, to keep my spirit strong. I told myself I wasn't living in their home to be praised or adored. I was there because Daniel asked me to, because he said it would mean the world to have his mother nearby as they raised their child. But with each passing week, I felt less like family and more like an intruder. Neighbours noticed the tension too. Once, during a gathering, Claire made a joke about me being old-fashioned in front of everyone. People laughed politely, but I saw the awkward glances. Some pitied me, others looked away, pretending they hadn't heard. Daniel sat silently, swirling his glass, unable to meet my eyes. That night, I lay awake in my small room, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the house pressed down on me. I remembered the days when Daniel was a boy, running to me with scraped knees, when he whispered that I was his best friend, when he promised he'd always take care of me. Where had that boy gone? How had I become invisible to him? The answer came in Claire's voice the next morning. I was setting the table for breakfast when she walked in, her tone sharp. "You don't have to keep doing that, Margaret. Honestly, you're making things more difficult. We like things a certain way, and when you interfere, it throws everything off." I froze, my hands still holding the plates. I wanted to say, "I'm not interfering, I'm trying to help," but I didn't. I swallowed the lump in my throat and sat down quietly, feeling the weight of my own uselessness. It was as if she wanted me to vanish. and perhaps, in her eyes, I already had. Daniel came down moments later, kissed Claire on the cheek, and grabbed his coffee. He didn't even notice that I hadn't touched my food, or that my eyes were red from a sleepless night. He rushed out the door with a distracted, "See you later, Mum." The words so automatic they barely carried meaning. I wanted to cry out, "Do you not see? Do you not hear how she speaks to me?" But the words remained trapped in my chest. Yet even as the pain grew, something inside me began to shift. I found myself studying Claire more carefully, not just her words, but her expressions, her habits, the flickers of unease she tried to hide. For all her arrogance, there were cracks in her confidence, and though I didn't know it at the time, those cracks would grow wider, until the very walls she built to keep me out would collapse around her. I stayed silent then. But life has a way of turning tables. The real turning point in those early months came during a family gathering. Daniel had invited a few relatives and neighbours over for dinner, a small celebration of his recent promotion. I spent the day helping to prepare, though most of my suggestions were brushed aside. Still, I managed to set the table with care, arranging flowers from the garden and polishing the silverware until it shone. As the evening began, the house was filled with laughter and chatter. I told myself to keep a low profile, to simply smile and enjoy watching Daniel shine. For a moment, I almost believed it would be a pleasant night. But Claire never let opportunities like this pass. Halfway through the dinner, one of the guests complimented the flowers on the table. "These are beautiful," she said warmly. "Who arranged them?" Before I could even open my mouth, Claire leaned in with a laugh. "Oh, my mother-in-law insists on doing little things like that. She gets restless if she's not busy, you know. I let her because it makes her feel, well, useful." The words hung in the air like smoke. A few guests chuckled politely, but others shifted uncomfortably. I felt my face burn, my heart thundering in my chest. I lowered my eyes, staring at the plate in front of me. In that moment, it wasn't just the insult, it was the casual way she stripped me of dignity, reducing me to a charity case in front of everyone. Daniel cleared his throat, clearly uneasy, but he said nothing. Nothing to defend me. Nothing to remind Claire that I was more than just a decoration at his table. I forced a smile, the kind that hides cracks beneath its surface, and excused myself to the kitchen. There, alone among the clatter of dishes, I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. I told myself not to cry, not here, not where others could see. But deep down I knew something had broken that night. After the guests left and the house quieted, I retreated to my room. The muffled sound of Daniel and Claire laughing together downstairs cut into me like a blade. I had been invisible during dinner, and now I was forgotten entirely. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling. Memories of my sacrifices rushed through my mind, the nights I worked until my hands ached, the mornings I walked in the cold just to save money for Daniel's tuition, the countless times I swallowed my own needs so he could thrive. And this was what I had become in my son's home, a subject of ridicule. Still, even through the ache, I held on to a quiet truth. Life has its seasons. Just as winter yields to spring, so too does arrogance face its reckoning. Claire might have believed she held all the power, but she had yet to learn that pride often sets the stage for its own downfall. I stayed silent then. I bore the insults, the dismissals, the laughter at my expense. But silence is not the same as defeat. One day, sooner than she ever imagined, Claire would learn that the woman she mocked was far stronger, far wiser, and far more enduring than she realized. And when that day came, everything would begin to change. After that dinner, Claire's attitude toward me only hardened. What had once been subtle barbs became open dismissals, and what had been whispered comments behind closed doors turned into cutting remarks spoken without shame. The birth of my grandson brought me a new kind of hope. I thought perhaps holding a baby in my arms again would heal the distance, would remind Claire of the importance of family, and would draw us together. But instead, It became another way for her to push me out. When the baby cried, I would rise from my chair instinctively, years of motherly habit guiding my steps. Yet Claire would always swoop in, her voice firm. "It's fine, Margaret. I know what I'm doing. You don't need to interfere." Interfere. That word stung worse than any other. I wasn't trying to take her place. I only wanted to share in the joy of raising a child, to offer the wisdom that comes from experience. But to Claire, my presence was a threat, not a gift. Once I suggested rocking the baby to sleep the way I used to with Daniel. Claire cut me off mid-sentence. "We're not doing things like that anymore. I've read modern parenting blogs. Your methods are outdated." The room fell silent, her words sharp enough to slice through the air. I felt myself shrinking back, as if I were nothing more than a relic from another time. Daniel, who had been scrolling through his phone, didn't even look up. He let the moment pass without a word. And that silence, the silence of the boy I once raised with everything I had, echoed louder than Claire's insults. It wasn't only the baby. Claire began excluding me from even the simplest household decisions. When Daniel suggested I might join them for a weekend outing, she quickly interrupted. "It's just for us, Daniel. We need family time. Just the three of us." Her eyes flicked toward me as she said it, making sure I understood I wasn't part of that picture. I started to spend more time in my small room at the back of the house, listening to the muffled sounds of their laughter drifting from the living room. The isolation pressed on me heavily. I began to ask myself questions that kept me awake at night. Had all my sacrifices meant nothing? Had the years of exhaustion, the prayers whispered in the dark, the double shifts, the lonely tears, had all of it simply vanished, forgotten? The worst part wasn't Claire's arrogance, it was Daniel's silence. He avoided conflict like it was a disease. He buried himself in work, staying later at the office, and when he was home he pretended not to hear the way his wife spoke to me. I longed for him to defend me, to remind Claire that I was not an intruder but his mother. But the words never came. And Claire, emboldened by his silence, only grew bolder. She began speaking of me as though I weren't even in the room. "Daniel, we really need our space. Don't you think it's time your mum considered moving into her own place?" The first time I heard her say that, I froze. The way she said her own place carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I had given my son everything. I had poured myself out so he could have a home, a career, a family. And now, the woman he married was suggesting I didn't belong under his roof. I smiled weakly, as though the words hadn't pierced me, but inside, a storm was raging. Claire didn't stop with subtle hints. Over the weeks, her words sharpened into commands, and her tone left no room for misinterpretation. One morning, I was folding laundry in the living room. Tiny baby clothes, soft blankets, Daniel's shirts neatly ironed. It gave me a sense of purpose, a small way to contribute. But when Claire walked in and saw me, her lips tightened. "Margaret," she said coolly, "you don't have to do that. We send the laundry out now. Honestly, it's not hygienic to have you fussing over everything." I froze, a shirt half folded in my hands. Hygienic? As if my touch somehow dirtied their clothes. I quietly placed the shirt on the pile and stepped aside. My chest burned with humiliation, but once again Daniel said nothing. He sat on the couch typing on his laptop, pretending not to notice. It was always like that. His silence became Claire's permission slip. The more he ignored, the bolder she became. At dinner one evening, I tried to make small talk, mentioning how I used to prepare Daniel's favourite stew during exam weeks. Claire laughed loudly, clinking her glass. "Times change, Margaret. We don't live on old recipes anymore. Daniel has more refined tastes now." Her words stung, but what hurt more was the way Daniel smiled faintly at her remark, as though it were true. Did he really think the meals I once cooked with love were simple or embarrassing now? I felt invisible in my own son's presence. Days stretched into weeks, and Claire's arrogance grew into something darker, a performance meant to remind me I no longer had a place. She rearranged furniture, redecorated rooms, and when I offered to help, she dismissed me with a wave of her manicured hand. No, Margaret, this is our home. You can just relax. Relax. That word had become her weapon. She wielded it as if I were a guest overstaying my welcome, not the woman who raised the man sitting beside her. But the most painful moment came one Saturday afternoon. The baby was fussing, his tiny cries echoing through the house. Claire had stepped out to meet friends, and Daniel was dozing in the armchair. I gently picked the baby up, humming softly, rocking him just as I had rocked Daniel decades ago. For a brief moment, joy filled me. His little body settled against mine, his cries fading into soft whimpers. My heart swelled. Maybe, I thought, this is what will remind them I still matter. But the front door opened, and Claire's sharp voice cut through the tenderness like a blade. "What are you doing?" She snatched the baby from my arms, glaring as though I had committed a crime. "I told you not to interfere. You'll spoil him. If you can't respect boundaries, maybe you shouldn't be here at all." Daniel stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. For a moment I hoped he would finally speak up, that he would tell Claire she had gone too far. But instead he mumbled, "Claire, let's not argue." Then he disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me standing there hollow and shaking. That night, lying awake in my small room, I whispered to myself, maybe she's right. Maybe I don't belong here. I thought about all the years of sacrifice, the meals skipped so Daniel could eat, the shoes worn thin because I chose to buy him new ones instead of myself, the nights I sat by his bed when he was sick, whispering prayers into the darkness. And now, in the home I helped him build, I was treated as a burden. I wondered if every choice I had made as a mother had been meaningless, if my worth had truly expired the moment Daniel said "I do" to Claire. But even as those thoughts pressed heavily on me, another voice whispered quietly within, "Life has a way of turning tables." The days began to feel heavier, each one carrying its own small wound. I would wake up early, as I always had, preparing breakfast with quiet care. Toast, eggs, fruit neatly arranged, little rituals that made me feel useful. But more often than not, Claire would stroll into the kitchen after me, wrinkle her nose and say, "We don't eat like that anymore, Margaret. Just leave it. I'll order something better." The word better stung. My food, my effort, my love. It was all dismissed with one word. I tried keeping myself busy. I dusted shelves, organised cupboards, even trimmed the flowers in the garden. But Claire noticed everything. One afternoon she stood in the doorway as I carefully arranged roses in a vase. "Margaret, you really don't have to meddle in every corner of this house. Honestly, it feels like you're trying to make it yours. But it's not." Her words hung in the air, cold and deliberate. I looked down at the roses, suddenly ashamed of the joy I felt placing them in water. Daniel, of course, avoided it all. He left for work before dawn, returning late, exhausted. If he noticed my fading presence, he said nothing. When I tried to talk to him, just to share how I felt, he would sigh, rub his temples and mutter, "Mum, please, I can't handle more stress right now. Just let things be." It was as though I had disappeared from his life. I was a shadow, moving quietly in the background, careful not to disturb the fragile peace of his marriage. And yet, I longed for connection. Some evenings, when the baby fussed, I would stand outside the nursery door, listening to his soft cries. I wanted so badly to step in to comfort him, to give Claire a moment of rest. But I knew what she would say. She had already made it clear. Don't interfere. So I stood there listening, aching, my hands trembling at my sides. My room had become my refuge. I spent long hours there, sitting by the small window, staring at the street below. Children rode bicycles, neighbours waved to one another, and life moved forward without me. Inside, I felt trapped, as though I were an unwelcome guest biding her time until she was finally asked to leave. That moment came sooner than I expected. One evening after dinner, Claire sat across from me with a glass of wine in hand. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Margaret," she began, her voice smooth, "have you ever thought about getting your own place? Somewhere cozy, just for you? I think you'd be happier with your independence. After all, you've done your part raising Daniel. Now it's time to live for yourself." Her words sounded almost generous, but I heard the truth buried inside. "You're not wanted here." Daniel looked up briefly, then lowered his eyes to his plate. He didn't defend me. He didn't even protest the idea. His silence was an answer in itself. I managed a tight smile, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm fine here," I whispered, though my voice barely carried across the table. Claire's smile tightened. "Of course," she replied, but her eyes told me this was only the beginning of her campaign to push me out. That night, lying in bed, I felt the crushing weight of loneliness pressing down on me. I had spent my life giving, sacrificing, loving. And now, at 62, I was being told, both through words and silence, that I no longer belonged. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder, maybe Claire was right. Maybe the years of devotion, the sacrifices, the nights of worry and the days of work, maybe all of it had lost its meaning. Maybe a mother's worth really did expire once her child built a new life. But as those thoughts darkened my heart, another flicker of defiance rose quietly inside me. A whisper I couldn't silence. Life has a way of turning tables. The days blended together in a haze of silence and small humiliations. I moved through the house like a ghost, careful not to disturb, careful not to speak unless spoken to. My presence felt like an inconvenience, and I could feel Claire's eyes on me, even when she said nothing, measuring, waiting for me to finally give up and walk away. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone while I was tidying the hallway. Her voice was light, almost playful. "Yes, it's exhausting having her here," she said with a laugh. "Honestly, she hovers like she owns the place. I've dropped hints, but she doesn't take them. I think I'll just have to push harder." The words hit me like a blow. I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself, my knees weak. So it wasn't just in my head. She really was planning to drive me out. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. I had cried too many times already, alone in my room at night when no one could hear. Now there was only a dull ache, a heaviness that settled into my bones. That evening, when Daniel returned home, I almost told him everything. I rehearsed the words in my mind. "Daniel, I can't live like this anymore. Your wife doesn't want me here, and your silence hurts more than her insults ever could." But when I saw his tired face, his loosened tie, the weight of his long day carved into his expression, the words caught in my throat. Instead, I smiled faintly and asked if he wanted tea. He said yes without looking at me. Later that night, I sat by the window, staring out into the dark. For the first time, I let myself think seriously about leaving. Maybe Claire was right. Maybe I would be better off on my own, in a small apartment somewhere, where no one could mock me or treat me as though I were nothing. The thought was both terrifying and oddly freeing. But then, another wave of sorrow hit me. I had no one else. Daniel was my only family. Leaving this house would mean leaving him, leaving my grandson, leaving behind the only thread of connection I still had. Could I really survive that kind of loneliness? I pressed my hand against my chest, whispering to the night, "Is this what my life has come to? Giving everything, only to be left with nothing?" The silence of the room gave no answer, but in that silence, I felt something stir, a quiet, stubborn ember deep inside. The next morning, as I moved through the house with my usual quiet steps, I noticed something different. Claire was distracted, her phone buzzing with messages. She was arguing with someone, her voice sharp, defensive. I couldn't hear the details, but I caught words like money, account, and mistake. For the first time in weeks, she looked unsettled. I didn't say a word. I simply observed, tucking the moment away in my mind. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was enough to remind me of the whisper that had carried me through so many lonely nights. Life has a way of turning tables. And though I still felt broken, still felt invisible in my own son's home, a strange feeling began to creep into my heart. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The invitation came unexpectedly. Claire announced one morning that she was hosting a dinner for some neighbours and a few of Daniel's colleagues. Her tone was bright, almost too bright, as she listed out the dishes she planned to serve and the new wine she had ordered. I kept quiet, as I usually did, but inside I felt a flicker of unease. Large gatherings often became opportunities for Claire to display her charm to outsiders and to put me in my place when she thought no one was looking. On the evening of the dinner, I dressed carefully in a modest navy dress, smoothing the wrinkles with trembling hands. It wasn't fancy, but it was neat. I wanted to at least look presentable among the polished guests who would soon fill the dining room. The house buzzed with laughter and chatter as neighbours arrived. Glasses clinked, and Claire floated from guest to guest like a hostess in her element. She looked stunning in her fitted dress, her smile flawless, her voice warm. For a while I thought perhaps the night would pass without incident. I helped quietly in the kitchen, arranging dishes and carrying plates to the table. Nobody seemed to notice me much, but I didn't mind. At least I wasn't in Claire's way. But as dinner unfolded, her mask began to slip. One of the neighbours, a kind older woman, complimented the roasted chicken. "This is delicious," she said. "Did you make it, Margaret?" I smiled faintly, grateful for the acknowledgement, but before I could answer, Claire laughed lightly, shaking her head. "Oh no, she tries to help, bless her heart, but it's better if she just watches. Cooking isn't really her strength. We don't want the food too outdated, do we?" The table erupted with polite chuckles, though some guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. My face burned as I lowered my eyes to my plate. It didn't stop there. Later, when the conversation turned to family, someone remarked how lucky Daniel was to have his mother nearby. Claire seized the moment, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Lucky? Well, I suppose. Though between us it does feel a little crowded at times. It's not always easy having an extra person underfoot." Her words sliced through me, and this time the laughter was louder. Daniel shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, staring down at his wineglass as though it might swallow him whole. I wanted to disappear. But Claire wasn't finished. As dessert was served, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes glittering as she raised her voice just enough for everyone to hear. "You know, sometimes I wonder if Margaret even realises how much of a burden she's become. I mean, we're trying to build our own life, and yet—" She gestured vaguely toward me, shrugging as though the conclusion was obvious. The word burden echoed in my ears, heavy and merciless. I felt the sting of tears, my vision blurring as the guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one spoke. No one defended me. I placed my napkin carefully on the table, forcing my trembling hands to stay steady. Then, without a word, I rose and walked quietly out of the dining room. My footsteps were slow, deliberate, each one carrying the weight of years of sacrifice dismissed in a single cruel sentence. In the privacy of my room, the tears finally came, hot and unstoppable. I pressed my face into the pillow to muffle my sobs. I had never felt so small, so discarded, so unwanted. But as the hours passed and the laughter from downstairs eventually faded, a strange calm settled over me. Something inside had shifted. I realised that Claire had not only humiliated me, she had revealed herself. For the first time, others had witnessed her cruelty. And though no one spoke up that night, I sensed their discomfort, their pity. It was a faint glimmer, but it was enough. And as I lay awake in the darkness, I whispered to myself, That was the night the ground began to shift beneath Claire's feet, though she didn't realise it yet. The morning after the dinner, the house felt strangely heavy. Claire hummed in the kitchen, pouring coffee as though nothing had happened. But Daniel avoided my eyes, his jaw tight as he adjusted his tie. I sat quietly at the table, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea. The humiliation from the night before lingered like smoke in my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again. A burden. When Daniel finally left for work, he kissed Claire's cheek but didn't say a word to me. His silence cut deeper than her insults. But by the end of that week, something began to change. One evening I overheard Daniel on the phone in his study. His voice, usually calm, carried an edge of panic. "No, please, just give me a little more time. I didn't know they'd cut the budget. I can fix this." I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding. His company had always seemed stable, his job secure. But now, listening to him plead with someone, I realised cracks were forming in the life Claire had been so determined to control. Later, I found him sitting in the dark, his head in his hands. He looked up when I entered, his eyes weary. For the first time in weeks, he spoke to me without Claire present. "Mum, I might lose my job." I sat beside him, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "Then we'll face it together," I said softly. He didn't reply, but he didn't pull away either. That small moment of closeness, so fragile yet so real, was the first I'd felt in a long time. Meanwhile, Claire remained oblivious. She carried on with her usual arrogance, hosting lunches with friends, posting photos online, spending money as though nothing could touch her. But the tension between her and Daniel grew. I heard the sharp edges of their arguments through the walls late at night. Words like bills, overdraft, and responsibility floated through the air like cracks in glass. One Saturday afternoon, as I folded laundry in my room, I heard them arguing again, this time louder. "Do you even understand what this means?" Daniel's voice was sharp, breaking through the walls. Claire snapped back. "Don't put this on me. You're the one who can't hold on to a job. Don't you dare embarrass me like this in front of everyone." Her words pierced me. Embarrass me. Not us. Not our family. Just her. I closed my eyes, my hands trembling over the fabric. It was the first time I had heard Daniel raise his voice in months. And though part of me ached for him, another part felt the smallest flicker of vindication. For once, Claire's perfect mask was slipping, and Daniel was seeing it too. The following week, things only worsened. Daniel came home earlier than usual one evening, his face pale, his steps slow. He didn't say much at dinner. Later, when Claire pressed him, he admitted it. He had been laid off. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Claire slammed her fork onto her plate. "Do you have any idea what this means for us? For me? How am I supposed to explain this to my friends? To our neighbours?" Daniel's voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the strain. "It's not about your friends, Claire. It's about our family. We'll figure it out." But she didn't want to figure it out. She wanted to blame, to deflect, to protect her image at all costs. As I watched them, something stirred in me again. For so long I had been silent, allowing Claire's cruelty to define my days. But now, as I saw her panic over appearances while my son faced real hardship, I realised her power was not as unshakable as she believed. And for the first time in years, Daniel glanced at me, not with indifference, not with dismissal, but with something almost like recognition, as if he remembered I was still here, still his mother, still someone he could lean on. The ground was shifting, slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. The weeks after Daniel lost his job revealed sides of people I had never seen before. Daniel, though shaken, tried to remain steady. He spent long hours at the computer, polishing his resume, sending applications and making phone calls. His pride was wounded, but he carried himself with quiet determination. Claire, however, spiraled. Her perfect world had developed cracks, and she scrambled desperately to cover them. Instead of cutting back on expenses, she spent more: new clothes, lavish dinners with friends, expensive networking events she insisted would help Daniel find opportunities. One evening, I found a stack of unopened bills on the counter. Credit card statements, red letters stamped across them. When I asked gently if Daniel knew, Claire snapped, "Stay out of it, Margaret. This is none of your business. You wouldn't understand how things work anyway. Just keep to your room." Her words stung, but I tucked the knowledge away. She was unravelling, and for the first time she couldn't hide it. The neighbours noticed too. A few days later, while I was out watering the garden, Mrs. Grant from next door stopped by the fence. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Margaret, I just wanted to say, I'm so sorry for what happened at that dinner. It wasn't right the way she spoke to you." Her kindness startled me. I had assumed everyone had agreed with Claire, or at least ignored me out of convenience, but here was someone acknowledging my pain. I managed a small smile, though my throat tightened. "Thank you," I whispered. And that wasn't the only moment. Another neighbour, Mr. Lewis, offered to carry groceries into the house one afternoon. "Don't worry about what people say," he muttered as he set the bags down. "Some of us see things clearly." Their words didn't erase the hurt, but they planted something new inside me, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as invisible as I thought. Meanwhile, Daniel began to change too. Late at night, when Claire had gone to bed, he sometimes knocked softly on my door. We would sit together, quietly talking. He confessed how lost he felt, how ashamed he was of failing to provide. I listened, offering gentle reminders of his strength, of the sacrifices he had already made. Once, as he left, he paused in the doorway. "Mom, I don't say this enough, but I'm glad you're here." Those words, simple as they were, healed more than he could have known. But if Daniel was beginning to lean on me, Claire noticed, and she despised it. Her remarks grew sharper. She criticised everything I did, from folding the laundry to the way I hummed while I worked. She accused me of undermining her authority whenever Daniel asked for my advice. The more Daniel turned toward me, the more desperate she became to push me out. One Saturday she staged another dinner. This time she invited fewer people, close friends she thought she could impress. She dressed elegantly, rehearsed smiles plastered on her face. But the mask was thinner now, and the cracks showed. Her friends whispered when Daniel excused himself early, muttering about another rejection email. They noticed when Claire laughed too loudly, bragged too much, drank a little too quickly. And when one of them asked me quietly how I was holding up, Claire snapped, "Oh, don't bother with Margaret. She thrives on pity. That's all she's good at." The room fell silent. Even her friends exchanged uneasy glances. I lowered my eyes, swallowing the sting of her words, but inside, I felt something shift. Her cruelty was no longer invisible. Others were seeing it now, and the more she tried to expose me, the more she revealed herself. That night, as I lay awake, I realised the balance was beginning to tilt, not in loud, dramatic ways, but in small, quiet shifts. Daniel's eyes on me, neighbours' kind words, friends' uneasy glances at Claire. She thought she was tightening her grip, but in truth, it was slipping. The fragile mask Claire wore could not hold forever. Her need to control, to shine brighter than everyone else, began to betray her. The bills piled higher. Collectors started calling the house at odd hours, their voices firm, demanding payments. Daniel, worn down by rejections and pressure, finally discovered the truth when he opened a letter addressed to both of them. "Claire," he said one evening, his voice low but steady, "why didn't you tell me we were this far behind?" She waved her hand dismissively, pacing the room. "Don't overreact, it's temporary. I have it under control." Control? Daniel held up the paper, the red stamps glaring in the dim light. "This is not control. This is drowning." For the first time I watched as Daniel raised his voice, not at me, not in frustration with the world, but at her. Claire's eyes flashed with something I had never seen before. Fear. She quickly masked it with defiance, but the moment lingered. In the following days, Daniel grew quieter, but not in the same way as before. This silence was different, watchful, careful. He studied her actions, noticing details he had once ignored. When she spent large sums on a party dress, when she lied about a business dinner that was nothing more than drinks with friends, when she mocked my presence again, he saw. And though he didn't always speak, I could tell his patience was thinning. Claire, sensing the ground shifting beneath her, fought harder to maintain her dominance. She tried to rally allies among her friends, but her charm was no longer convincing. The more she spoke, the more her desperation leaked through. I recall one night vividly. She burst into the kitchen while I was preparing tea. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she hissed. "Sitting there quietly, letting people feel sorry for you, while you make me look like the villain." I turned to face her, steady but calm. "Claire, I don't need to make you look like anything. People see what they see." Her lips trembled, though she quickly masked it with a bitter laugh. "Don't get comfortable, Margaret. This is still my house, and one way or another you'll regret overstaying your welcome." Her words carried venom, but her eyes betrayed something else. Panic. A few days later, that panic reached its peak. Daniel received a call from a company he had interviewed with. For the first time in months, his face lit up. Hope sparked in his eyes as he listened carefully, nodding, asking questions. I held my breath, silently praying this would be the chance he deserved. But when he hung up, his joy dimmed. The position required relocating, something he was willing to consider, but Claire was not. "You're not seriously thinking of leaving this city, are you?" she demanded when he explained. "Why not? It's a good opportunity, a stable job, good pay." "No," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "My life is here. My friends, my circle, everything I've built. I'm not throwing that away just so you can start over." Daniel stared at her, stunned. "Claire, this isn't just about you. We're a family. We need stability." But she shook her head stubbornly, as if her image mattered more than their survival. That argument stretched late into the night, echoing through the house. From my room, I heard every word. Claire's voice rising, Daniel's frustration breaking through, silence falling heavy between each wave of anger. By morning, Daniel was withdrawn, his eyes shadowed. He sat with me quietly over breakfast, pushing food around his plate. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Mum, I think I'm starting to see her for who she really is." Those words pierced me with a strange mix of sorrow and relief. I had longed for him to see, but it hurt that it had taken so much pain to open his eyes. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart heavy yet oddly steady. And that was the night I knew. Everything was about to change. The ground beneath Claire's feet had begun to shift. She didn't realize it yet, but her world was no longer unshakable. The cracks in Claire's carefully constructed world widened with every passing day. The very confidence she once wore like armor now appeared brittle, fragile, ready to snap at the slightest pressure. It started with small things. Friends who once hung on her every word suddenly became too busy for coffee dates. Invitations to events she loved showing off at grew scarce. She brushed it off at first, saying people were jealous, but the truth was plain. Her social circle was slipping away. At home, the atmosphere grew heavier. Daniel no longer looked at her with blind admiration. Instead, his gaze carried questions, doubts, even disappointment. Where he once stayed silent to avoid conflict, he now listened more closely, watched more carefully, and challenged her when her stories didn't add up. "Claire," he said one evening, his voice firm, "why are there charges on our account I don't recognize?" She stiffened. "It's nothing, just a few personal things." "Personal things?" He held up the statement. "Hundreds of dollars every week. Dresses, dinners, memberships. We can't afford this anymore." Her tone sharpened, defensive. "I won't apologize for maintaining my standards. Just because we're struggling doesn't mean I have to live like some—" She stopped herself, glancing at me in the kitchen doorway. Her cheeks flushed, but the damage was already done. Daniel's eyes narrowed, and his silence spoke louder than any argument could. I quietly stepped back, unwilling to fan the flames. My instinct wasn't to gloat, though every cruel word she'd thrown at me echoed in my memory. Instead, I focused on keeping my dignity intact. While Claire's foundation crumbled, I found strength in small things: preparing meals, tending to the garden, keeping the home calm for my grandson. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to remind her of all the insults, the names she'd called me, the times she'd treated me like furniture in my own son's house. But I held my tongue, because I knew something she didn't. Life has a way of balancing scales without my interference. Her desperation grew clearer. She became jumpy, snappish at the slightest inconvenience. One morning, I overheard her on the phone, her voice cracking. "You don't understand," she said to whoever was on the line. "I can't lose this. If people find out, everything I've built is gone." She hung up abruptly, her hands trembling as she pressed her forehead against the wall. When she saw me, she straightened instantly, pasting on that same smug smile she had always used to belittle me. But the cracks in the mask were impossible to miss. Later that night, as I tucked my grandson into bed, he looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Grandma," he whispered, "why is Mommy always angry now?" My heart ached. I smoothed his hair and kissed his forehead. "Sometimes people forget what really matters," I told him softly. "But don't worry, sweetheart. Things won't stay like this forever." Inside, I knew I was speaking more truth than he could understand. Life was beginning to return her cruelty back to her, not in the ways she expected, but in the ways she feared most: loneliness, doubt, and a reputation slipping through her fingers. And I remained steady, not because I was blind to her downfall, but because I wanted my grandson, and even Daniel, to see that true strength doesn't shout, doesn't mock, doesn't break others down. True strength endures quietly, with grace. If you believe that karma always finds its way back, let me know in the comments below. Do you think Claire is finally getting what she deserves, or should Margaret step in and speak her truth? The consequences of Claire's choices grew heavier, and this time she couldn't brush them aside with a sharp remark or a new outfit. One afternoon, Daniel came home early, his face pale and jaw clenched. I was folding laundry when he walked in, holding a letter in his hand. Without a word, he dropped it on the table in front of Claire. "What's this?" she asked, feigning innocence. "You tell me," he replied, his voice cold. I glanced at the paper. It was a notice, final demand for overdue payments. The amount was staggering. Claire froze, her usual bravado cracking. "It's not what it looks like," she muttered. Daniel's voice grew sharper. "Not what it looks like. This is thousands of dollars, Claire, thousands. While I've been struggling to get back on my feet, you've been spending money we don't even have." For the first time in years, Claire didn't have a ready comeback. Her lips trembled as she searched for an excuse, but Daniel's glare silenced her. I quietly stepped out of the room, giving them privacy, but the sound of their voices carried. Claire cried, begged, tried to twist the story into her favor, but Daniel wasn't buying it anymore. That evening, the silence between them was deafening. She sat at the dining table, staring at nothing, while Daniel retreated to his office with a stack of papers. The son who once worshipped her charm now looked at her with disillusionment. The following days only worsened her situation. Creditors called constantly. Friends who had once praised her suddenly avoided her. Even at the local market, whispers followed her, subtle but cutting, she noticed. I could see it in the way she clenched her purse tighter, in the nervous flicker of her eyes as she hurried past neighbours. Meanwhile, I carried myself the way I always had. I cooked, I cleaned, I cared for my grandson. When people greeted me, I smiled warmly. Some neighbours even pulled me aside to quietly say, "You've always been the steady one, Margaret. People see that." Those words warmed me, not because they elevated me, but because they showed the truth was becoming visible without me ever raising my voice. Claire, however, took it differently. One evening, she confronted me in the kitchen, her eyes blazing with desperation. "Do you enjoy this?" she spat. "Do you enjoy watching me fall apart while everyone praises you for being so saintly?" I turned to face her, calm as ever. "No, Claire, I don't enjoy seeing anyone fall apart, but I also won't pretend your choices haven't led you here." Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her hands curling into fists. For a moment I thought she might lash out physically, but instead she spun on her heel and stormed off, slamming the door behind her. Later that night, Daniel sat with me in the living room, his face heavy with worry. "Mum," he said quietly, "I don't even know who she is anymore. Or maybe I'm finally seeing who she's always been." My heart ached for him. "Sometimes," I replied softly, "we love someone so much that we ignore what's right in front of us. But the truth has a way of coming out, Daniel. Always." He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with sadness. As he went upstairs, I whispered a silent prayer, not for Claire's suffering, but for Daniel's strength and my grandson's peace. Because while Claire's world crumbled, I knew the real test was not how far she would fall, but how I would carry myself as it happened. And I chose dignity, every single time. Claire's desperation was no longer subtle. It became all-consuming. Every day I could feel the tension she carried like a storm cloud over the house. She hovered in the kitchen, scrutinizing every meal I prepared, as if my very presence reminded her of her unraveling. She barked orders at Daniel and snapped at my grandson over minor things, trying to reclaim a sense of control that had long since slipped from her grasp. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, I remained steady. I didn't gloat or retaliate. I simply went about my life with calm consistency, preparing meals, caring for my grandson, keeping the house peaceful. Where Claire sought conflict, I sought balance. Where she sowed tension, I offered quiet understanding. Neighbours began to notice. One afternoon, Mrs. Grant leaned over the fence, whispering kindly as I pruned the garden. "Margaret, you're handling everything so gracefully. I don't know how you do it." I smiled gently. "I just try to keep my heart steady, that's all." Even Daniel, exhausted and wary, started leaning on me more. We would sit late into the evenings discussing plans, finances, and possibilities. He listened to my advice without judgment, appreciating my perspective in ways he hadn't before. He was beginning to see me not just as his mother, but as someone who could guide and support him through challenges. Meanwhile, Claire's behaviour became increasingly erratic. She lashed out at minor inconveniences, a misplaced napkin, a slightly burnt loaf of bread, a spilled glass of water. The neighbours noticed her agitation too, casting uneasy glances her way. No longer was she the polished, charming woman everyone admired. Her arrogance had collapsed into desperation. One night, Claire confronted me directly, her eyes flashing with panic and anger. "Do you think you're better than me, Margaret? Sitting here calm while I deal with all of this?" I met her gaze steadily. "I don't think I'm better, Claire. I just refuse to let this storm sweep me off my feet. I focus on what I can control and try to keep my heart intact. You could try that too." Her hands trembled, though she tried to hide it behind a dismissive gesture. She spun away, leaving the room with her words hanging unfinished. It was during these moments that I realized the subtle power of restraint. While Claire's desperation and panic made her appear chaotic, my patience, kindness, and dignity drew attention in quiet but unmistakable ways. People noticed the difference. Daniel, neighbours, even my grandson. They saw who maintained grace under pressure and who was consumed by fear and ego. Later that week, Daniel spoke to me privately. "Mum, I don't know why it took me so long, but I'm starting to see everything clearly. I see how much you've done for me, and how little she's done to build or protect our family." My heart warmed, but I stayed composed. The important thing is that you see it now, Daniel. That's what matters. Claire, oblivious to the quiet alliances forming around me, continued her self-destructive path. Every attempt to regain control seemed only to accelerate her decline, and yet I never celebrated her mistakes. I simply continued to live with integrity, trusting that life had its own way of balancing the scales. By the end of the week it was clear, Claire's world was crumbling, while mine remained steady, not because I sought revenge, but because I refused to compromise my dignity. And as I looked around the quiet, orderly home that evening, I whispered to myself, this is the strength that matters, not power, not control, but patience, kindness, and resilience. That's what endures. By the final days of this phase, Claire's facade had all but crumbled. Every attempt to regain control only exposed her desperation further. She argued constantly with Daniel over money, snapped at neighbours over minor slights, and even berated my grandson for small mistakes. The tension in the house was palpable, yet I remained composed, maintaining my routine and calm demeanour. Daniel began to notice the contrast more sharply than ever. He observed how I moved through the house quietly, caring for him and his son without a word of complaint. He saw me treat the neighbours with kindness and grace, even as Claire lashed out. Slowly, his admiration shifted from the wife he had once trusted blindly to the mother who had silently held their family together all these years. One evening, Claire, sensing that she was losing her grip, tried to assert herself once more. She cornered me in the kitchen, her voice dripping with venom. Don't think for a second that everyone is on your side, Margaret. People respect me, not you. I looked at her calmly, my voice steady. Respect is earned, Claire, not demanded through fear, deception, or cruelty. Perhaps you'll see that one day. Her eyes flashed, but no words came. She spun and stormed away, leaving the room heavy with tension. Meanwhile, small signs of Margaret's quiet influence became visible. Neighbours offered subtle nods of sympathy. Friends asked gentle questions, and Daniel increasingly sought my counsel. Even my grandson, too young to fully grasp the complexity, sensed the difference between fear and calm, tension and reassurance. One afternoon, as I organised the living room, Daniel approached quietly. Mum, I just want to say thank you for everything, for staying strong when I couldn't, for guiding me, for being here. I smiled softly, pressing a hand over his. You don't need to thank me, Daniel. Family's about supporting each other through storms, not keeping score. As the week drew to a close, it became clear that Claire's world was fragile, and Margaret's patience and dignity had quietly established a new balance. Claire's arrogance had been replaced by anxiety, and her desperation revealed what power she truly held, or failed to hold, over others. Margaret understood with a quiet wisdom that the unfolding events were not about revenge or satisfaction. They were about the natural consequences of choices, the inevitability of truth, and the endurance of those who maintain integrity even when circumstances seem stacked against them. That night, as I sat by the window, watching the house settle into silence, I whispered softly to myself, life has a way of finding balance. And when it does, you realise that patience, dignity, and resilience endure far longer than cruelty ever could. The house was quiet, yet I felt the shift beneath the surface. Claire's desperation and mistakes had set the stage for change, and Margaret's quiet strength had not gone unnoticed. The coming days would bring further clarity, consequences, and perhaps even the ultimate resolution. The tension that had been building for weeks finally erupted one late afternoon. Claire, already fraying at the edges, decided to host a reconciliation dinner with neighbours and family friends, a chance, in her mind, to regain her composure and reassert control. I prepared quietly in the kitchen, moving with calm efficiency, aware of the storm about to enter the dining room. My grandson's laughter carried softly through the house, a small reminder of what truly mattered. The guests arrived, their polite smiles barely hiding curiosity. They had noticed changes in Claire, her anxious gestures, her clipped words, her desperate need for validation. Yet she ignored the subtle judgments around her, insisting on a performance of confidence. Dinner began smoothly, and for a moment I thought perhaps it could pass without incident. But as the evening progressed, Claire's arrogance collided with reality. It started with a question from a neighbour about Daniel's recent job search. Claire attempted to redirect the conversation, but the details she tried to gloss over were already known to several guests. She fumbled through explanations, and the polite smiles shifted to looks of quiet disbelief. Then one of her trusted friends, a person Claire had long relied upon for social support, spoke up, gently but firmly. "Claire, I'm concerned about some of your choices. It seems like you've been prioritising appearances over everything else, even family. I just hope you realise the impact it's having." The words hit Claire like a thunderbolt. Her eyes widened, and for the first time she had no rehearsed retort. Murmurs spread among the guests. The subtle judgments she had long ignored became impossible to dismiss. Daniel, who had been sitting silently, finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying weight. "Claire, we need to face the truth. The way you've been managing things, the way you've treated people, especially my mother, is unacceptable. I won't stay silent anymore." The room went quiet. Claire's face paled as the authority she had wielded so effortlessly dissolved in an instant. No grand speech, no charm, no smiling mask could restore it. Her carefully controlled image had collapsed under the weight of reality, and everyone present saw it. I remained seated quietly, observing, knowing the balance had shifted. My role was not to humiliate her, but to hold steady, to show that calm dignity and measured actions always outweigh rage, arrogance, and cruelty. Claire's humiliation was complete, yet I offered no harsh words. I simply continued my work in the kitchen, serving dishes with the same gentle care I always had, my face serene. The contrast could not have been more stark. Her desperation versus my composed presence. Even my grandson noticed. He tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Grandma, why isn't she like you?" I smiled softly, brushing his hair back. Because sometimes it takes time to learn that strength isn't about shouting or scaring people. It's about calmness, patience, and doing what's right even when it's hard. By the end of the evening, the shift was undeniable. Claire's friends and neighbours left with subtle glances that spoke volumes. She had lost the aura of control she had relied upon for so long, and the truth of her arrogance and cruelty had been exposed in a way she never anticipated. And through it all I realised, true victory does not require anger, revenge, or spectacle. It requires patience, dignity, and the quiet knowledge that integrity always outlasts cruelty. The day after the dinner, the atmosphere in the house felt different, tense and quiet, like the calm after a storm. Claire's composure had cracked, and her desperation became impossible to hide. Every glance, every gesture betrayed her growing anxiety. Even Daniel, who had once avoided confrontation, now looked at her with steady clarity, no longer blinded by charm or false confidence. Claire attempted to reclaim control, but her efforts backfired. She scrutinized my every move, looking for flaws, searching for a reason to criticize me. But there was none. I moved with quiet precision, tending to the house, my grandson and Daniel without ever raising my voice or seeking attention. My calmness became a mirror, reflecting what she could not grasp. That power is not about intimidation, but about steady, measured actions. Her social circle, too, began to notice the cracks. Neighbours who had once deferred to her now offered polite nods or subtle advice to me. Whispers circulated about her behaviour, her arrogance, and the mounting consequences of her choices. It wasn't gossip born of malice. It was recognition of the difference between her instability and my composure. One afternoon, Daniel pulled me aside, concern etched on his face. "Mum, she's spiralling. I don't know how to handle it sometimes." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Daniel, let her actions speak for themselves. You've already started seeing the truth. Your focus should be on what matters most, our family and your son. Later that week, Claire's desperation culminated in an incident that finally shattered the last remnants of her image. She had attempted to host an expensive outing with friends, trying to display her control and charm, but it fell apart when her financial mismanagement came to light. Invitations were declined, subtle criticisms surfaced, and her friends began quietly distancing themselves. She fumed in private, but in public she could do nothing. Through all of this, I observed silently. I had no desire to gloat, no need to revel in her failures. My role was not to humiliate, but to maintain integrity. And the contrast between her chaos and my calmness spoke louder than any words ever could. Even Daniel began to rely on me more openly. He sought my advice on decisions, shared his worries, and acknowledged my guidance in ways he had never done before. Margaret, the woman who had been belittled, mocked, and treated as invisible, was now the anchor in their lives. One evening, after Claire had stormed off following another fruitless confrontation, Daniel turned to me quietly. "Mum, I don't think I realised before how strong you really are. You've always been here, quietly guiding, supporting, and I didn't see it until now." I smiled softly, warmth filling my chest. "It's never about being noticed, Daniel. It's about doing what's right, even when no one is watching. That's true strength." And in that moment, I knew the balance had shifted completely. Claire's arrogance, her cruelty, her desperation, all of it had collapsed under the weight of her own choices. Meanwhile, my quiet patience, measured actions, and enduring dignity had carved a space of respect, stability, and emotional triumph. The climax wasn't marked by shouting or revenge. It was marked by calm, deliberate strength, the kind that leaves a permanent impact long after the chaos has subsided. The following days were quiet but charged with subtle shifts. Claire's desperation no longer had the power to intimidate or control. She moved through the house with forced confidence, trying to mask her growing isolation, but everyone around her, Daniel, neighbours, even my grandson, sensed the change. Her attempts to regain influence were futile. Every criticism she threw my way bounced off, absorbed only by my patience and composure. Where she sought drama, I offered stability. Where she sowed tension, I provided calm. And slowly, the balance shifted permanently. One afternoon, Daniel called both of us into the living room. He spoke with a firmness that had been absent for months. "Claire, I can't ignore how things have been anymore. Your actions, the way you've treated my mother, the way you've prioritized appearances over our family, it has consequences. I need honesty, respect, and responsibility from the person I share my life with." Claire's lips parted, searching for a retort, but no words came. For the first time, she had nothing prepared. She had built her world on arrogance and deflection, and now it was crumbling in front of everyone. I remained silent, letting Daniel speak, letting truth stand unchallenged. The power of calm dignity was evident. Claire realised finally that shouting or scheming would no longer shift the balance. That evening, as I tucked my grandson into bed, he whispered, "Grandma, you're like a superhero. You're calm, and people listen to you." I smiled softly, brushing his hair back. Strength isn't about being loud or scaring others. It's about staying true to yourself and your values even when it's hard. Later, I watched Daniel handle his mother-in-law with care, but firmness. It was a moment of emotional justice, one not fueled by vengeance, but by recognition of the truth. Claire, exposed and powerless, could only watch as the household she had tried to dominate quietly re-established itself under honesty, patience, and respect. Margaret's triumph was subtle, yet unmistakable. It wasn't a spectacle. It wasn't revenge. It was the natural outcome of consistency, integrity, and calm strength. Those who had once doubted her, the neighbours, Daniel, even Claire herself, could no longer ignore her worth and the depth of her resilience. By the end of the week, Claire's facade was gone. The arrogance, the hostility, the need to control vanished in the wake of truth. And in that silence, Margaret's quiet victory spoke volumes. I realized then, fully and completely, that life's balance does not need to be enforced through anger or malice. It flows naturally when patience, dignity, and measured strength are maintained. The satisfaction of seeing justice, not through cruelty but through integrity, was complete. And in the calm of that evening, as the house finally settled into peace, I whispered quietly to myself, "This is what enduring strength looks like. Not revenge, not spectacle. Just truth, patience, and the quiet power of dignity." The emotional payoff was not just for me, but for everyone who had witnessed the slow unraveling of arrogance and the rise of quiet, lasting strength. The house felt lighter in the days that followed the climax. Claire had retreated into her own thoughts, the weight of her actions pressing upon her in ways she could no longer ignore. The tension that had once dominated every corner of the home gradually lifted, replaced by a calm that came not from her submission, but from the quiet resilience of those who had endured her cruelty. Daniel approached me one morning, his expression sincere and vulnerable. "Mom, I realize how much I took for granted. How blind I was to what you've always done for me, for this family." I placed a hand gently on his arm. "Daniel, love is not about realizing everything all at once. It's about noticing the truth when it's revealed and acting on it. What matters is that you see it now." We spent the morning talking, not about the past grievances but about the future. Plans for the household, ways to care for my grandson, and how to build a life centered on respect and understanding. The bond between mother and son, long strained by Claire's interference and his own avoidance, began to restore itself. There was laughter again, soft and genuine, the kind that fills rooms with warmth rather than tension. Outside, I continued my quiet routines, gardening, cooking, and caring for my grandson, while observing Claire from a distance. Her life had shifted dramatically. Friends who had once flocked to her for charm and social connections now hesitated. Invitations dwindled, and her attempts to assert dominance within the household were met with polite resistance and calm boundaries. She was living with the natural consequences of the choices she had made, each day offering subtle reminders of what arrogance and cruelty bring. I reflected often on the pain I had endured, the insults, the dismissals, the moments I had been made to feel like I was nothing. And yet, in the reflection, there was also clarity. Life had a way of restoring balance, often in ways that were quiet but undeniable. No dramatic confrontation had been necessary, no act of revenge had been required. The truth, patience, and dignity I maintained spoke louder than any words could. Even my grandson noticed. One afternoon, as we sat together in the garden, he looked up at me with wide eyes. "Grandma, you always stay calm, even when people are mean. Why?" I smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from his forehead. "Because, darling, strength isn't about being loud or hurting others. It's about knowing who you are and standing by what's right, even when it's hard." Daniel, too, witnessed this daily. Slowly he began to carry that lesson forward, showing patience, understanding, and appreciation for the quiet strength that had sustained our family. And in these moments, I understood fully that the respect we earn is revealed through our actions, our choices, and the integrity we carry, not through fear, manipulation, or social dominance. The house had found its rhythm once more, quiet, steady, and filled with a sense of restored balance. Days turned into weeks, and the subtle changes within the household became more permanent. Daniel, now aware of the depth of his mother's patience and resilience, actively sought her guidance in ways he had never before. Together, we made decisions calmly, planning for my grandson's future and ensuring that the home remained a place of security and warmth. Claire, on the other hand, was left to confront the reality of her own choices. Her social circle had thinned, invitations no longer arrived, and casual acquaintances began to distance themselves. She had built her identity on appearances, arrogance, and control, but the very foundation of that identity was gone. Her attempts to dominate daily life at home were now met with quiet, firm boundaries. Each day brought a reminder. Power rooted in fear and manipulation could not withstand patience, dignity, and integrity. I often reflected on how different life had been before these events. The constant humiliation, the cutting remarks, the feeling of invisibility. It had been painful beyond words, and yet those trials had taught me invaluable lessons. I realized that the worth of a person is never measured by how others treat them, but by the consistency of their values and the strength of their character in the face of adversity. One evening, as I watched the sun set from the porch, my grandson in my lap, I found myself thinking about the unexpected justice life had delivered. Claire's downfall had occurred naturally, without any malicious intervention on my part. The balance was restored quietly, gently, and in a way that left her fully responsible for her own actions. Daniel joined us, his face soft with understanding. "Mum, seeing how you handled everything, I've learned more from you than I ever could have imagined." I smiled, squeezing my grandson's hand. "Remember this, both of you. True strength isn't about striking back or seeking revenge. It's about living with dignity, treating others with respect, and standing firm in your values, even when it's difficult." As days passed, the home settled into a rhythm of calm. Claire, though still present, no longer dictated the emotional atmosphere. Her arrogance and cruelty had been replaced by reflection and perhaps regret. The weight of her actions was hers alone to carry, a lesson in accountability that no one else needed to enforce. And through it all, I understood a truth I had long known, but only now fully appreciated. Being treated as nothing does not define one's worth. Every act of patience, every gesture of kindness, every moment of resilience builds a legacy that cannot be erased by insults, mockery, or attempts to diminish it. The quiet strength I had maintained, seen by my son, acknowledged by neighbours and felt by my grandson, was the most profound validation of all. It was in this calm, steady presence that I recognized the full measure of life's balance. Respect is not demanded. It is revealed through our actions, especially toward those who have given, sacrificed, and endured. The days that followed marked a new beginning for our household. Daniel and I grew closer than ever, our bond strengthened by the trials we had endured together. He began to carry himself with more thoughtfulness and awareness, showing patience not only with me but also with his own son. The lessons of humility, respect, and integrity that had emerged from the chaos slowly became the foundation of our renewed family life. Claire, meanwhile, lived with the consequences of her own actions. The arrogance that had once defined her was replaced by quiet isolation. Social invitations dwindled, friendships faded, and opportunities she had taken for granted slipped through her fingers. Yet the transformation of her life was not my doing. It was the natural outcome of her choices. The truth had surfaced, and she was left to reckon with it on her own. I often reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The constant criticism, the insults, and the moments I had felt unseen could have broken me. Instead, they became lessons in resilience, patience, and self-respect. Life had a way of teaching that no act of cruelty could erase the worth of someone who remains grounded in dignity. One quiet evening, I sat with my grandson by the window, the soft glow of twilight filling the room. He looked up at me and whispered, "Grandma, you're always so calm. How do you stay strong?" I smiled, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. Strength isn't about loud words or showing off. It's about knowing your worth, keeping your heart steady, and treating others with kindness, even when they don't do the same. That's what really matters. As I spoke, I realized how much Margaret had grown through these trials. I had learned that true respect is not something that can be demanded or forced. It is earned through the consistent demonstration of integrity, empathy, and courage. Every act of patience and every choice to respond with calm rather than anger had built a legacy no insult or humiliation could ever erase. Turning to the audience, I would leave them with this thought. Respect isn't demanded. It's revealed by how we treat others, especially those who once sacrificed for us. In the end, life's unexpected justice had arrived, not through confrontation or revenge, but through the quiet power of resilience and dignity. Margaret had endured, and in doing so, she became a living testament to the strength of character that outlasts cruelty and arrogance. If you found Margaret's story inspiring, please like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories that explore resilience, dignity, and the triumph of patience over adversity. The home was calm, the family renewed, and the lessons learned would endure. The story of hardship, patience, and quiet triumph had reached its resolution, leaving a lasting impression not only on those who lived it, but on everyone who witnessed it.